Should Christians use ChatGPT? For some, this question is easy. Of course, Christians should not use ChatGPT. Then they proceed to list the 99 problems with AI as a tool of the devil and the disastrous consequences for humankind if you use any AI, including ChatGPT. But that's the worst of them. All right, I'm being a little bit silly. Other people, this question is also easy. They'd say, of course, Christians should use ChatGPT. Then they proceed to list the 99 positives of using AI as a tool for the glory of God. For others, the question is difficult and they're not really sure what to do. So they use it sometimes, but then they maybe feel guilty about it, but they don't know. They see things on the internet about the bad things, but they also maybe experience some good things with it, like helping them study the Bible or giving them sources or different things. So they're not sure. So there are many angles people have taken on this, and there are going to continue to be questions about the use of computers and AI and technology. But what I wanted to do today is look at this question from the perspective of what I'm calling system consequences. There's probably a better name for it, but the system has a consequence, a negative consequence. And so because ChatGPT, or what we'll get into, data centers, computers have negative consequences, does that mean we should not use them? So we're not going to deal with all the philosophical other issues. I just want to talk about this one, system consequences. Specifically, ChatGPT's depletion of fresh water and how that informs our ethics. So, little story how we got to this point. I prompted ChatGPT to make a cartoon of myself earlier this morning. This been going on Facebook and social media, prompting this ChatGPT prompt, and it was funny. Right? It's just like me in my study holding the Bible in Greek in the background or something. And it was me and my kids had fun with it. And I actually thought about this before I saw anybody else post about it. That I told my kids, ChatGPT uses a lot of energy to make this one little image, and it took quite a bit of time to do it. And they're like, well, how? Why does it use so much energy? And well, I told them the computers that it takes to make this and do this generative AI stuff takes a lot of energy, but I just don't know how to explain it. I don't know why, but it does. And I also saw today that ChatGPT uses a lot of water, specifically fresh water, to cool down the computers. And also in that information, I found out that every data center uses AI now, and data centers, but even before AI, had massive computing systems. And these computers, like Google and Meta, Facebook, other companies, streaming services, cloud storage, online gaming, they all use these huge data centers, and they have to use a whole bunch of water to cool these computers down. So the problem isn't just with ChatGPT, but with all major companies that we utilize for anything really online that we use. And so I'd imagine most people, they just don't realize how much energy and fresh water that these actually deplete, and that they're using up, and we don't have fresh water because of these things. Now, I'm not an expert on fresh water scarcity. I ChatGPT'd some sources and found out, there's not any real danger in the here and now, that the whole world is going to be without fresh water. But in certain areas, there is some scarcity. And just from an overview perspective, I think more access to clean drinking water is better. So in simplest terms, depletion of fresh water is bad. So I hope data centers can grow to be more efficient. They can use non-potable water, if that's how you say it, or recycled water. So they're not using this fresh drinking water. So that more people it'd be less scarce, right? And so I think that is a problem that we should try to fix. And I mean, not me, I'm not in this world, but if you're watching this and you run a data center, I'm sure they're trying to work on it to be more efficient. So anyways, I'm not an expert on fresh water, but I think fresh water depletion is a bad thing. So I think we should try to improve that. However, I do think it is permissible according to each person's conscience. If obviously Scripture is clear, if it goes against your conscience, you should not do it. But to inform your conscience, I think it's okay to use data centers, even if they are imperfect. They are imperfect. They're not perfect. No system is, which leads me to kind of my main talking point here to introduce system consequences and how this is an issue of conscience, especially this specific issue of the use of fresh water. I don't think it's at the level of sin. I just don't see the facts there. I think there's a lot of gray area of the data and its implications. And really what's helpful for me is understanding perspective. Because when you see stats of how millions and millions of gallons of water, fresh water, are being used, you're like, oh my goodness, how are we going to have water tomorrow? But in fact, we're not in a water shortage because of these data centers. And actually, the data centers are one of the smallest usage consumables of depletion of the water. Because you can look this up. This makes sense as well. I don't have all peer-reviewed studies on this, but just think about it this way. The agricultural industry accounts for roughly 70% of freshwater depletion or withdrawals. So 70% of all the fresh water that we have access to, that we're using, 70% gets used in the agricultural industry. I mean, this makes sense. You're pumping gallons and gallons across the world you're thinking, not even in America, but worldwide, pumping it into deserts so you can farm. That's billions of gallons of water, right? And then you think about all the water due to aging and leaking infrastructure, pollution. You think of coal, gas, nuclear power plants that are using fresh water to cool their systems down. That just makes more sense than that they're using way more than computers are using, right? So just from that initial research, data centers seem to play a very small part in freshwater scarcity. Now, that doesn't mean we can't address the problem. And if you work for a data center or you're in charge of this, please try to make it more efficient and not use as much. But when you're talking about 1% of the depletion versus 70% of the depletion, that makes a big difference of what we're talking about. And the system having negative consequences for what you're doing, because all I'm doing, I'm using ChatGPT to try to get answers, to try to get fast research and use my time wisely. And so that's the intent of my usage of it. And I think it's good to consider the byproducts and effects of it. But I do think that we are venturing into something that Kevin DeYoung has called the infinite extensibility of guilt. Now, that's a mouthful. The infinite extensibility of guilt. Your guilt, it just extends forever. Everything that you touch and do, you're probably guilty in some way for doing it. And I think this might be an example of that. He writes in his book, I got it here. This is a great book. It's called Impossible Christianity. And the subtext is why following Jesus does not mean you have to change the world, be an expert in everything, accept spiritual failure, and feel miserable pretty much all the time. So if you feel miserable as a Christian all the time, like you're always guilty and you can never do enough, this book is very helpful, and it just is a good overview of what it means to live as a normal follower of Jesus. And so I definitely recommend this one. And in this chapter called The Infinite Extensibility of Guilt, he writes that according to some, most of us are complicit in a host of evils that are inherent in the structures and systems of our world. The food you eat, not ethically sourced. The sports you watch, exploitation from billionaire owners. The vacation you're looking forward to, the campground was stolen from someone else, and the transportation it takes to get there is overheating the planet. Everywhere we turn, we are told how bad we are and how bad we have been. Forget about the 10 Commandments. There are a million calculations we must make if we are to walk in a righteousness and justice. He goes on to say, with tax collectors and soldiers throughout the Gospels, There is no talk of restitution for imperial supremacy or extractive systems, nor any summons to dismantle the structures they inhabited. There is just a straightforward command to live a godly life, be generous to others, repay what you have stolen. And this is in Luke chapter 3, verse 12. Tax collectors also came to be baptized, and they asked him, "Teacher, what should we do?" He told them, "Don't collect any more than you have been authorized." So you notice he doesn't tell them to quit their jobs and don't be a part of the Roman government, which is evil and has all these negative consequences of the system. He just says, do your job, but don't do more than what you're authorized. All right, so don't steal money. Pretty basic. Likewise, in verse 14, some soldiers also questioned him, "What should we do?" So, soldiers of the Roman army. He said to them, "Don't take money from anyone by force or false accusation, and be satisfied with your wages." He doesn't say to quit the army, quit the Roman army, even though the Roman army had a whole bunch of negative consequences. All right, and so we kind of learn from this is like just because you're part of or in part of a negative system, it doesn't mean you are guilty of all the system's negative failures. Right? Kevin DeYoung goes on to say, do not all our favorite streaming services make money, at least in part, by the commodification of sex? It's true. And are we sure about the purity of our mutual funds? Or the clothes and shoes that we have that are manufactured overseas? Or the labor practices of online retailers we use every day? And so if you're going to have the foundation philosophy that you can't be a part of an organization, you can't contribute to an organization, you can't fund an organization, you can't partake in a system that has a sin or negative consequence, then that philosophy will end up leading you to become separated from everything and everyone. And really I think the Amish would be the separatist movement, where that would be the natural outflowing of that. But we don't do that. And I think there's a natural reason why, because we're not guilty of everything that every other organization or system does, right? So he goes on to write that Christian obedience becomes impossible when, instead of the basics of putting off the works of the flesh and putting on the fruit of the Spirit, we're called to account for every unpopular system, every broken system, and every bad thing we see in culture. But we're not guilty of those things. And Christian obedience boils down to more simplicity. You have the 10 Commandments, you have the two greatest commandments. That is the summary of the law. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And if you can use ChatGPT while loving God and loving your neighbor, I think that's okay. So, should Christians use ChatGPT? Or really, if you're going to be consistent, any other platform like Google, Meta, Netflix, etc., that uses massive data centers that deplete massive amounts of fresh water? I think given the low percentage of the total depletion of fresh water of data centers, the direct impact is negligible. I think a lack of any clear scriptural warrant says otherwise. Obviously, we want to be good stewards of the world, but 1% less, seemingly less than 1% of the depletion of the world's fresh water does not seem warranted enough not to use these things. So I think Christians are permitted to use ChatGPT as long as they do so with a clear conscience, and in line with clear commands in Scripture for the glory of God. Now, I'm open to being wrong on this, obviously, and I take this humbly. And for people that disagree, like I said, I think this is a conscience issue. You can disagree on this and not use it, but it seems to me that ethical underpinning would lead you to not really use very much of anything online. And maybe that, and if that is you, you're not watching this video because it's online. So I guess that is what it is. But I do want us to think biblically and Christianly, Christianly about this. But I hope this is helpful. Should Christians use ChatGPT? I think it's okay. So.